that too many people wouldn't find out the truth about UFOs. Others thought somebody was just plain stupid. Neither was true. The answer was simply that the official attitude toward UFOs had drastically changed in the past few months. They didn't exist. They couldn't exist. It was the belief at ATIC that the one last mystery, the green fireballs, had been solved a few days before at Los Alamos. The fireballs were meteors, and Project Twinkle would prove it. Any further investigation by the Army would be a waste of time and effort. This drastic change in official attitude is as difficult to explain as it was difficult for many people who knew what was going on inside Project Sign to believe. I use the words official attitude because at this time UFOs had become as controversial a subject as they are today. All through intelligence circles, people had chosen sides, and the two UFO factions that exist today were born. On one side was the faction that still believed in flying saucers. These people, come hell or high water, were hanging on to their original ideas. Some thought that the UFOs were interplanetary spaceships. Others weren't quite as bold and just believed that a good deal more should be known about the UFOs before they were so completely written off. These people weren't a bunch of nuts or crackpots either. They ranged down through the ranks from generals and top-grade civilians. On the outside, their views were backed up by civilian scientists. On the other side were those who didn't believe in flying saucers. At one time, many of them had been believers. When the UFO reports were pouring in back in 1947 and 1948, as the people they were now scoffing at. But they had changed their minds. Some of them had changed their minds because they had seriously studied the UFO reports and just couldn't see any evidence that the UFOs were real. But many of them could see the "I don't believe" bandwagon pulling out in front and just jumped on. This change in the operating policy of the UFO project was so pronounced that I, like so many other people, wondered if there was a hidden reason for the change. Was it actually an attempt to go underground, to make the project more secretive? Was it an effort to cover up the fact that UFOs were proven to be interplanetary, and that this should be withheld from the public at all cost to prevent a mass panic? The UFO files are full of references to the near mass panic of October 30th, 1938, when Orson Welles presented his now famous The War of the Worlds broadcast. This period of mind-changing bothered me. Here were people deciding that there was nothing to this UFO business right at a time when the reports seemed to be getting better. From what I could see, if there was any mind-changing to be done, it should have been the other way. Skeptics should have been changing to believers. Maybe I was just playing the front man to a big cover-up. I didn't like it, because if somebody up above me knew that UFOs were really spacecraft, I could make a big fool out of myself if the truth came out. I checked into this thoroughly. I spent a lot of time talking to people who had worked on Project Grudge. The anti-saucer faction was born because of an old psychological trait. People don't like to be losers. To be a loser makes one feel inferior and incompetent. On September 23, 1947, when the chief of ATIC sent a letter to the commanding general of the Army Air Forces stating that UFOs were real, intelligence committed themselves. They had to prove it. They tried for a year and a half with no success. Officers on top began to get anxious, and the press began to get anxious. They wanted an answer. Intelligence had tried one answer, the then top secret estimate of the situation that proved that UFOs were real, but it was kicked back. The people on the UFO project began to think maybe the brass didn't consider them too sharp, so they tried a new hypothesis. UFOs don't exist. In no time, they found that this was easier to prove, and it got recognition. Before, if an especially interesting UFO report came in and the Pentagon wanted an answer, all they'd get was an "it could be real, but we can't prove it." Now, such a request got a quick, snappy, "it was a balloon," and feathers were stuck in caps from ATIC up to the Pentagon. Everybody felt fine. In early 1949, the term New Look was well known. The new look in women's fashions was the lower hemlines. In automobiles, it was longer lines. In UFO circles, the new look was custom. The new look in UFOs was officially acknowledged on February 11, 1949, when an order was written that changed the name of the UFO project from Project Sign to Project Grudge. The order was supposedly written because the classified name Project Sign had been compromised. This was always my official answer to any questions about the name change. I'd go further and say that the names of the projects, first Sign, then Grudge, had no significance. This wasn't true. They did have significance, a lot of it. End of Chapter 4. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 5 of The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Edward Ruppelt. Chapter 5. The Dark Ages. The order of February 11, 1949, that changed the name of Project Sign to Project Grudge had not directed any change in the operating policy of the project. It had, in fact, pointed out that the project was to continue to investigate and evaluate reports of sightings of unidentified flying objects. In doing this, standard intelligence procedures would be used. This normally means the unbiased evaluation of intelligence data. But it doesn't take a great deal of study of the old UFO files to see that standard intelligence procedures were no longer being used by Project Grudge. Everything was being evaluated on the premise that UFOs couldn't exist. No matter what you see or hear, don't believe it. New people took over Project Grudge. ATIC's top intelligence specialists, who had been so eager to work on Project Sign, were no longer working on Project Grudge. Some of them had drastically and hurriedly changed their minds about UFOs when they thought that the Pentagon was no longer sympathetic to the UFO cause. They were now directing their talents toward more socially acceptable projects. Other charter members of Project Sign had been purged. These were the people who had refused to change their original opinions about UFOs. With the new objective, get rid of the UFOs. It was never specified this way in writing, but it didn't take much effort to see that this was the goal of Project Grudge. This unwritten objective was reflected in every memo, report, and directive. To reach their objective, Project Grudge launched into a campaign that opened a new age in the history of the UFO. If a comparative age in world history can be chosen, the Dark Ages would be most appropriate. Webster's dictionary defines the Dark Ages as a period of intellectual stagnation. To one who is intimately familiar with UFO history, it is clear that Project Grudge had a two-phase program of UFO annihilation. The first phase consisted of explaining every UFO report. The second phase was to tell the public how the Air Force had solved all the sightings. This, Project Grudge reasoned, would put an end to UFO reports. Phase 1 had been started by the people of Project Sign. They realized that a great many reports were caused by people seeing balloons or such astronomical bodies as planets, meteors, or stars. They also realized that before they could get to the heart of the UFO problems, they had to sift out this type of report. To do this, they had called on outside help. Air Weather Service had been asked to screen the reports and check those that sounded like balloons against their records of balloon flights. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, distinguished astrophysicist and head of Ohio State University's astronomy department, had been given a contract to sort out those reports that could be blamed on stars, planets, meteors, etc. By early March, the Air Weather Service and Dr. Hynek had some positive identifications. According to the old records, with these solutions and those that Sign and Grudge had already found, about 50% of the reported UFOs could now be positively identified as hoaxes, balloons, planets, sundogs, etc. It was now time to start Phase 2, the publicity campaign. For many months, reporters and writers had been trying to reach behind the security wall and get the UFO story from the horse's mouth, but no luck. Some of them were still trying, but they were having no success because they were making a mistake of letting it slip that they didn't believe that airline pilots, military pilots, scientists, and just all-around solid citizens were having hallucinations, perpetrating hoaxes, or being deceived by the misidentification of common objects. The people of Project Grudge weren't looking for this type of writer. They wanted a writer who would listen to them and write their story. As a public relations officer later told me, "We had a devil of a time. All of the writers who were after saucer stories had made their own investigations of sightings, and we couldn't convince them they were wrong." Before long, however, the right man came along. He was Sidney Shallot, a writer for the Saturday Evening Post. He seemed to have the prerequisites that were desired, so his visit to ATIC was cleared through the Pentagon. Harry Haberer, a crack Air Force public relations man, was assigned the job of seeing that Shallot got his story. I have heard many times, from both military personnel and civilians, that the Air Force told Shallot exactly what to say in his article. Play down the UFOs. Don't write anything that even hints that there might be something foreign in our skies. I don't believe that this is the case. I think that he just wrote the UFO story as it was told to him by Project Grudge. Shallot's article, which appeared in 2 parts in the April 30th and May 7th, 1949 issues of the Saturday Evening Post, is important in the history of the UFO and in understanding the UFO problem, because it had considerable effect on public opinion.